Good morning. Welcome to Community Unitarian Universalist Congregation at White Plains. We gather in the light of four truths. It's a blessing you were born. It matters what you do. Your experience of the divine is true, and an important reminder you don't have to go it alone. If you are visiting us for the first time online this morning, please take a moment to click the link in the chat and fill out the visitor form to let us know that how you would like to be connected. If you're new and visiting in person, we invite you to stop by the welcome table and say hello. Later in the service, we will share joys and sorrows of our individual lives. For those here in person, please take a moment to add yours to the book by the windows near the stairs. For those on Zoom, please type yours in the chat.
Welcome and good morning. This is the second time that I have graced this pulpit in my 37 years of ministry, but the last was just next year, so I may be familiar to a few of you. And I was so happy to be invited back and see those of you I've already gotten to know and meet those of you I have yet to know. I am, last year I was the transition consultant to the transition team, and this year I am one of your team of 4 ministers who are working together to help shepherd you through this this year of transition as you go through the process of finding a new minister. Before I share the opening words, which actually are now from by Philip Hewitt. As I was getting ready for this service over the last couple weeks, the sermon changed a couple of times. The opening words changed 3 times. The early hymn changed at least once. And I realized just how much is happening in the wider world that is impacting so many of us so deeply personally. My thoughts first go, of course, to the people in Israel and Palestine areas and that devastating attack and the devastating response to the attack. And while we're yet opening another front, there's another front of war where neighbors are attacking neighbors. We also have a government that seems to be falling deeper into dysfunction, where not only can the 2 parties not speak in the same language, but even within one of the parties they can't speak the same language. And at a time when we are so needing to remember our connectedness as members of the human family, there are so many schisms that are deepening at the very time when I think what we need to do is find paths to be together. So reflecting on that and reflecting on the importance in my life at least, but I suspect in yours too, of communities like this, where we can see things differently and still love one another, where we can bring our woundedness and our despair at the same time that we can bring our hopefulness and our love and find new ways of broadening and opening our understanding, not only of the world outside us, but the world inside each of us. It is through communities like this that my hope resides as we really confront an increasingly complicated and stress-filled world. So Philip Hewitt, I heard him speak for the last time when he was 88 years old. He was one of our pioneer ministers in our congregation and wrote a wonderful history of the Universalist tradition of our Unitarian Universalism. Here are his words. From the fragmented world of our everyday lives, we gather together in search of wholeness. By many cares and preoccupations, by diverse and selfish aims, We are separated from one another, and we are often divided within ourselves. And yet we know that no branch is utterly severed from the tree of life that sustains us all. We cherish our oneness with those around us here and with countless generations that have gone before us. We would hold fast to all the good we have inherited, even as we would leave behind us what is outworn and what is false. We would escape from bondage to the ideas of our own day and from the delusions of our own fancy, and labor instead in hope for the dawning of a new day without hatred, a new day without so much violence, a new day without injustice. Let us nurture the growth in our own lives of the love that has shone in our hearts and been shown upon us by those who love us and by those who have come before, the rays of whose lamps can still illumine our way forward. In this spirit we gather. May we be at peace.
Our chalice lighting words for today are called Drawn Together by Jennifer Grayson. I'll start to read the poem, and I'll say the last few lines as on the screen and in your program. We come together every week, bound not by a creed or a mutual desire to please one God or many gods. Yet we are drawn together by a belief that how we are in the world, who we are together, matters. And now let's all say together, we light this chalice together in the knowledge that love, not fear, can change this world.
This morning's hymns will be shown here back behind me, the lyrics that is, and there are hymnals in the back of the sanctuary. And if you're joining us online, you'll find all of the hymn lyrics and our order of service on our website. So I invite you to rise in body or spirit for our opening hymn. It's number 22, Dear Weaver of Our Lives' Design. Dear weaver of our life's design, whose patterns are the bay, with skillful fingers gently guide the sturdy threads that will survive the tangle of our lace. Take up the fabric of our days with hands that gently hold, binding the ragged edge that care would sunder and that pain would tear and mend our raveling souls. Let eyes that in the plainest both the hate and beauty see, discern in us our richest hues, show us the patterns we may use to set our spirits free. Thank you. Please be seated.
Would you all like to come join me for a story? Winona, come on. Anyone young at heart, you're welcome. Good morning. How are y'all doing? Yeah, we're still waking up. Yeah, I know. Who can give me an example? Okay. Yes. What is an example of a feeling? Something that you feel. Can you think of one? Happy, absolutely. Yes.
Mad.
Mad. Yeah, yes. Sad. Scared, absolutely. Yes. Surprised. Yes, yes. Grumpy. Yes, absolutely. So our story this morning is about having two or even more feelings at the same time. Has that ever happened to you? Have you? Yeah? Tell me. Yeah, lots of feelings. Yes. Yeah, that's a great example. When we started school, felt nervous and happy. Do you have another example? Yes. Yes. Okay. When we get in trouble, sometimes we're sad and mad. Yeah. Yes, that happens to all of us, actually. So this story is called Double Dip Feelings. And it's by Barbara Kane and illustrated by Ann Patterson. Everyone has feelings, and there are lots of different kinds. Sometimes we feel cheerful, sometimes we feel sad, sometimes we feel cheerful and sad. Sometimes we feel playful, sometimes we feel mad, just like you said. Sometimes we feel both playful and mad. Yeah. And we talked just a minute ago about, sometimes we have two feelings at the same time. So there are pictures behind me if you want to see some pictures. When Billy began his first day at school, he felt big boy proud and little boy scared. Yeah, exactly like she said. When Amy's new brother came home to live, she felt somersault joy and left out sad. When the baby painted her face with an oatmeal fist, have you done that ever? Have you had oatmeal on your fist? No, okay. That's disgusting. Amy said, he's a funny little fella and a great big pest. Did you ever feel both silly and mad at the same time? Yeah. No. Oh. When Kathy's family moved to a different town, she said, I like this new house with a room of my own. But this one was smaller, but the old one was home. Did you ever feel happy and sad at the same time? Yeah. Yeah. When Kathy got the chickenpox and had to stay home, she said, I hate these itchy polka dots, but I love having story time and ice cream in bed. Right. When Kathy dumped her food on Toto's dish, she was glad to be rid of her spinach, but she was sorry to ruin poor Toto's lunch. Do you think the dog likes spinach? They don't? Okay. Okay, yeah, they could get sick. When Dan invited him for an overnight sleep, Billy said, I'll look silly if I bring my Teddy, but I think he'll be lonely at home by himself. Did you ever feel both embarrassed and excited at the same time? No. When darkness fell and it was time for bed, Amy felt jealous of the kids playing across the street, but almost happy to go to sleep. So, sometimes you feel both happy and sad. And sometimes you feel both sorry and glad. And remember, everyone has feelings and there are millions of different kinds. And sometimes we feel two at the very same time. And that's okay, right? That's beautiful. That's beautiful. You made that? You made that? I love it. You're very talented. So this morning, when we all leave, we're going to be singing a new children's blessing. Kim is going to help us. Adam will play a little bit of an intro, and then we will all join in. And the K to 6th graders are going to classes, and the 7th to 12th graders are meeting with the Ministerial Search Committee. Thank you so much for coming for the story. Ready to go?
May your mind be open to new learning. May your lips bring truth into the world. May your heart know love and your hands do the work of justice as you go your way in peace. As you go your way in peace. Let's do that again. May my mind be open to learning. May your lips bring truth into the world. May your heart know love and your hands do the work of justice as you go your way in peace. As you go your way in peace.
Hello, I'm Andrew Adachi. In this faith, we engage generosity. We cultivate a spirit of gratitude and hope, and we covenant to freely and compassionately share our faith, presence, and resources. Our altruism connects us to one another in relationships of interdependence and mutuality. We covenant to use our time, wisdom, attention, and money to build and sustain our community. For all that we do within and beyond these walls to further this vision, your kindness in all the ways it is expressed is deeply appreciated.
Let us enter a spirit of prayer and meditation together. As we consider our own lives and the events of the world, we ask the Spirit of peace to hold us and our anxieties and help us confront and heal the fear and loss that undergirds all anger. We invoke the Spirit of wisdom to inspire us in the steadfast pursuit of truth so that we may create a more just world. And we ask the Spirit of life to remind us of the inherent imperfection of all humanity and to help us to evolve toward love and compassion for all inhabitants of our planet. And a joy. Happy birthday, Adam Kent. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Adam. Happy birthday to you.
Let's do some more singing from our seats with our song response. It's number 123, which you'll recognize, Spirit of Life.
self-compassion, blow in the wind, rise in the sea, move in the hand, giving life the shape of justice, roots hold me close, wings set me free, Spirit of life, come to me, come to me. O God of many names and none, moving spirit, ocean of love, depth of being, called by many names, but always one. We pray this day for the people of Israel, who are living in fear, in pain, and anger after a barbarian attack upon a group of celebrating people and the butchery of a community, men, women, children, grandparents. Our hearts go out to them in their shock, in their anger, in their fear, and we recognize the depth of the holes in their hearts. May those holes be filled, at least some, with kindness towards one another, with memories that may cause pain now, but will bring joy sometime in the future. May they turn eventually from anger and hate towards their work of building beloved community. And may they grow also over time in their commitment to peace. And we pray this day for the people of Gaza and the West Bank, who are fleeing their homes or cowering in terror, who have themselves so often been victims and victimizers, and who are powerless to stop the powers that are flooding over them. May they too reach out their hands to one another. May governments around the world wake up to their duties of opposing violence in all its forms, and not confuse punishment with depriving people of water and food and medicine that belongs to all of us because we are human beings. God of justice and compassion, we pray not only for the perpetrators, for the victims of violence, but for the perpetrators as well. For the voice that assures us that violence can only be defeated when it is met with understanding and not by more violence. For all of us carry within us so many feelings, so many realities. May the anger and rage remember compassion and kindness. May the sorrow remember past and future joys. And may the voice that lives within each of us at times that encourage us to view each other as enemies which tells us that only our God only can protect our families, and that we should protect our community and our nation and forget that the person on the other side of that wall is wishing just the same thing. May we grow through all this pain and fear to come to understand that we are all a part of the tree of life, that no one is ever fully severed, that no one is expendable, that everyone is sacred. God of history, may we learn hard lessons, remembering how many times hatred has bred hatred, and the arm of violence and revenge bends back to strike the avenger. And that which we would do to the enemy is so often also done to ourselves. Spirit of true courage and our lasting hope, grant us, each of us, all of us, a vision of a peaceful and united world, where swords are beaten into plowshares, where people find the courage to reach out and finally trust one another, where we can finally realize that we are all dependent on one sun, on one earth, on one spirit of life. And finally, indwelling God's small, quiet voice within. Help us to listen to the voice of our own deepest selves. Help us to speak out for justice. Help us listen to the voices of those with whom we deeply disagree. Help us to acknowledge our own greed and our own fears. Help us to push our own government to apply the same energy and commitment and resources to peacemaking that it has to war making. Father and Mother of us all, help us to heal within. Help us to confront our own fears and prejudices and follow in our own daily lives the teachings of all the great spiritual teachers, the Rabbi Jesus, the Prophet Muhammad, the spirit of Vishnu and Shiva, who challenge us to feed and clothe the poor, to visit the sick, to minister to the prisoner, and yes, to answer that question, who is thy neighbor? By saying, you, and you, and you, and even you. As we move through these troubled times, and there have always been troubled times, may we remember and put our trust in the power of love and goodness, and open our hearts to ourselves and one another, and be willing to listen to the pain and the anger and the fear, and hold one another in this difficult time as we work yet again to find pathways to peace. May it be so. Amen. When I was asked to preach here I thought about where we were in the calendar, and we're a few weeks from what the holiday that in when I was growing up was still Columbus Day. Now it is often referred to as Indigenous Peoples Day, which thankfully, which feels a little better to me, and Thanksgiving, a uniquely American holiday. And both of these two holidays and both of these two stories, which we celebrate during those holidays, are complicated, multi-layered stories that evoke a lot of responses and are continually being revised as we learn more and more about the breadth and depth of our own history. They are some of our national myths. And I found this letter from a UU intern from about 5 years ago, where she reflects on this complexity. Her name is Sana Sneed, and at the very top of her letter, she says, "The goal is to create a beloved community, and this will require a qualitative change in our souls, as well as a quantitative change in our lives." The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. Sana writes, "This month, I'm excited to see my brother, who was deported for being undocumented. I haven't seen him for 4 years. Even better, my mom will be staying with him. My family is going through its own challenges, and now we're all spread out. One brother lives in Toronto, my mother lives in Myanmar, my dad lives in Virginia, and my youngest brother is moving to Atlanta. Sometimes I feel like we're an asterism of stars, like the Big Dipper, glimmering in the sky, connected by a mystery in the divine. We live as an asterism within a giant constellation, watching carefully which way the arc of the moral universe will bend. I've always had an uncomfortable relationship with Thanksgiving as a holiday, especially because of its historical premise. To me, it's a story of colonization and violence towards Indigenous people. If I see myself relating to anyone in some way in the Thanksgiving story, it is with the Indigenous people because of the colonization experienced by my own people. And yet this month, the idea of gratitude has become more complicated and pronounced for me. I'm grateful to be able to see my whole family, which hasn't happened to us much. And when it does happen, it takes visas and patience and passports and more patience and money, and it takes a country other than the United States of America. My brother is unable to ever return here. So it's ironic to me that we will be celebrating Thanksgiving this month, which to some people is a story of undocumented immigrants arriving to this country. And yet, our former administration has been deporting people and targeting immigrant activists at an unprecedented rate. And this, unfortunately, continues. How do we grapple with these contradictions and truths of Thanksgiving while maintaining the importance of gratitude, while affirming the importance of people's struggles, and especially those of people of color? All of this is to say that I've been thinking of what it means to build a beloved community, to find myself thinking, how can I bend the arc of the moral universe in a time when it seems to need more and more bending? Grace Lee Boggs, an Asian author, feminist, and philosopher, speaks to this when she states, "Each of us needs to be awakened to a personal and compassionate recognition of the inseparable interconnection between our minds and hearts and bodies, between our physical and psychical well-being, and between ourselves and all the other selves in our country and in this world. Both Boggs and Martin Luther King Jr. call us to challenge ourselves, our comfort zones, our biases, to sit in discomfort as we go about this messy, difficult work of building a beloved community and solidarity. To have patience when failures happen. To build a beloved community free of systemic oppression requires working within a connected community, holding space for imperfection, and having faith in the mystery that moves between us. To end, I leave you with a question. How are you building a beloved community with your communities and this congregation? Let's sing together one of the old, optimistic Unitarian hymns, Light of Ages and of Nations.
Light of ages and of nations, every race and every time has received thine inspirations, glimpses of thy truth sublime. Holy Spirit, sing that vision as the heavenly bell within. Oh, his heart's loving contrition from salvation from their sin. Reason's noble aspiration, truth in growing clearness saw. Conscience spoke its condemnation, or proclaimed eternal law. While thine inward revelations told thy saints their sins were heard, prophets to the guilty nations spoke thine everlasting word. Lo, that word abideth ever, revelation is not sealed, answering now our own endeavor, truth and right are still revealed, that which came to ancient sages, Greek, barbarian, Roman, Jew, written in the soul's deep pages, shines today forever new.
In her introduction to the book, A Short History of Myth, Karen Armstrong writes, "We are meaning-making creatures. From the very beginning, we invented stories that enabled us to put our lives in a larger setting, that revealed an underlying pattern, and gave us a sense that against all the depressing and chaotic evidence to the contrary, life had meaning and value." These stories I referred to, the story of Columbus discovering America, and the story of the first Thanksgiving in Plymouth, Mass, have for a long time been cherished parts of America's origin myth. A story that tells us not only who we like to think we were, but how we wish to be. For many people, these myth-like stories assure us that we have the firm ground of the past to anchor us, while the land of the present seems to be shifting in ways we do not understand. But we are living in a time when many of our precious national myths are being challenged. Not once, but again and again. No longer is it just the story of one brave man who knew the earth was round and courageously braved the seas to set his foot on what was America, which was really Hispaniola, to bring God and Christianity and civilization to a new world. There's a lot more to that story. There's a lot more to that man. And there's a lot of misconception at the core of that tale. To some extent, the same thing can be said of the Thanksgiving story, although it's a little bit more layered historically. My friend Michael, who is the minister in Keene UU Church, spent the first 20 years of his life at the Pilgrim Colony, being a Puritan. He was an actor. He played many parts, including John Bradford. And in his tenure before he entered the ministry, many changes happened in that town. There is now both Pilgrim settlement and a Wampanoag village. Almost half the people who work for the Plymouth Foundation are of indigenous background. And the stories are told in more varied ways, with more characters. Although when I checked this, there still was that first Thanksgiving, which was really the 2nd November, when the colonists and 90 Native Americans did come together and celebrate and eat, not turkey, mostly fish and shellfish and maybe a venison or two, a deer or two. And the feast went on for several days. The pictures of that feast, and you can find them very easily, include women and men and Wampanoags all together eating and laughing. And there may be some truth to that. It's the aftermath that we know that makes it harder. But it's also an image of maybe who we wish we really had been and who we maybe still can be as a nation that brings people together. And frankly, over many tables in many parts of the United States, finds ways to be grateful in a wider and much more diverse understanding of who we are. According to the historian Ronald Takai, the old stories are core parts of what he calls the master narrative of American history. Here are his words. According to this powerful and popular but inaccurate story, our country was settled by European immigrants and Americans are white. Race, observed Toni Morrison, he quotes, has functioned as a metaphor necessary for the construction of Americanness. In the creation of our national identity, American has always been defined as white, although who is white has changed. My friend I traveled with is half Italian and half Irish. And there was a time in Boston where there were signs everywhere saying no Irish wanted. Takai goes on to say that not to be white is to be designated as other, different, inferior, and perhaps this is a hard word, unassimilatable. I'm glad to be living in a time when we are questioning these myths. Later in her introduction to the book on myth, Karen Armstrong writes, "A myth is true because it is effective, not because it gives us factual information. If, however, it does not give us new insight into the deeper meaning of life, it has failed. It works only if it forces us to change our minds and hearts, gives us a new sense of hope, and compels us to live more fully." And I have come to believe, paradoxically, that the myth, the dream of America as a land of freedom and justice is a goal, but can also be a barrier to ever achieving that goal. As we paint our mythic stories around things that are either not true or merely half true. And yet it is painful to let go of the myths that has shaped us. I think this is particularly true when our sense of meaning and identity is threatened. When we are increasingly frustrated in our attempts to fill roles that we wish to fill. When the culture or communities we live in are going through a period of rapid and transformative change. And we may not know where our place is in this new and emerging world and culture. I think it is at times when people are afraid of being left behind or being given a lexicon of shame instead of victory and generosity that causes people to turn away from what is factual and true and try to take the clock back to an imagined past. It's hard to give up our myths. I think I learned this deeply in a very personal way at a Thanksgiving celebration in my family many years ago. Once upon a time, my family had been the very picture of a happy, successful white family. We loved each other. We were open-minded. My parents were civil rights supporters. We had enough money, but weren't filthy rich. Thank heavens, because I didn't even deal well with having enough money in those days. And we gratefully, all our friends came over to hang out at our house because my parents were so accepting. And yet we lived in a Jewish neighborhood where 90% of the people are my neighbors and most of our friends were Jewish. So we already had made the table a little wider. People used to joke about us as we were like the Waltons. We were like this family that everybody wanted to be, like those late 50s sitcoms, where dad was happy and mom was in the kitchen and the two children were bright and cheerful. It's embarrassing to admit that I actually kind of bought that for a long time. Too long a time. There were many changes in our family before that fated Thanksgiving dinner. My father's descent into alcoholism, my parents' divorce, our rapidly downwardly mobile financial situation, which necessitated the sale of not one but two homes. We moved down one step and then moved down three. My father's remarriage and move out of state, and then his death from throat cancer. But we held on to that myth. We celebrated Thanksgiving the way we had always celebrated Thanksgiving. And I don't just mean that we came together as a family. I mean that we had the same 7 vegetables, the same way of cooking the turkey, the same way of saying grace. And then it happened. My mother put apricots in the stuffing. Yes. Well, there's a prelude because the year before, when we were having it at my sister's house, my mother had tried peaches. And my sister and I, in a very understanding way, had said, Mom, this isn't our traditional stuffing. Stop with the fruit already. And she had said, well, I'm trying some new recipes and thought we would change just a couple of things. And we said, we do not want to change anything. We thought we were very clear. It's just my sister Prudence and I, but we can be loud when necessary, you know. So that year, there we are, sitting around, having our traditional Thanksgiving with the same 7 vegetables and the same grace at the beginning of the meal. And I bit into the stuffing, and there was fruit. Later, I found out it was apricots, but it didn't matter what fruit. It did not belong in my mother's traditional stuffing. And so, mature person that I was embarrassingly already a minister by then and leading a congregation. I said, excuse me, but I have to leave. And I left. I walked out of my own mother's house. I stormed down to the market to buy ginger ale, because that was my excuse, by the way. I needed some excuse. I was spitting mad. She doesn't listen to us. Why does everything have to change? This is ridiculous. And then when I walked back into the house, it hit me. All those years of struggle, we had held on to that myth that we were the perfect, happy, wholesome family. And part of the way we held on to it was to hold on to our transitions with a death grip. I have a bit of a hard time trying to be impartial during our culture wars that seem to be going on in this country because, honestly, and you will not be surprised to know this, I sort of firmly line up with one side of the culture war. And I'm finding it increasingly difficult to hold people who want us to go back to when women couldn't just, protect their own bodies, to where there isn't racism in the culture, so why don't you stop complaining, where everybody is happy and men are in charge and United States is a perfect government, but why should we care about anyone else? On so many levels, this fear of telling history to the point of changing textbooks and rewriting history so nobody ever will feel bad. That means no white people who have enough money to be comfortable will ever feel bad. It's scaring me. In my own state of New Hampshire, our Secretary of Education has they passed a law a year ago that if children were uncomfortable with what was being taught in history classes, you ready for this? The parents could complain, and if found guilty, could be fired on the spot. New Hampshire. So it's hard to live in New Hampshire right now. And however, I need to remember that it's hard to give up cherished myths, particularly the myths that make us feel special and exceptional, that give us a sense of pride, that when the present is crazy, we can always go back to the past. When great men like Washington and Thomas Jefferson, set this country on the path of freedom. What do we do when our cherished family or historical myths no longer serve us? How do we handle it? Well, often not so great. It turns out I'm not the only one who has had reaction formation from a change that is connected to wanting to feel that things are the way they used to be, or the way I used to believe that they used to be. We've changed Indigenous Peoples Day to the national holiday, even, they call it that even in New Hampshire, which could change any year. But, and we aren't abandoning telling the story, we're just trying to tell the story in more of its complexity. Our denomination is going through, I think, a very difficult and stressful time of trying to recognize our own level of white privilege, to try to find the stories from inside and outside our denomination that we have denied or not paid attention to in the past, to face up to some of our collective sins and not just sing the praises of our ancestors. Many years ago, about 25 years ago, this created quite the kerfuffle in what was then the Thomas Jefferson district in Southern Virginia. And I knew the minister who was not well, but the minister who was there then. And that district, which was named for Thomas Jefferson, had celebrated every year with a ball, the Thomas Jefferson Ball. And everybody would dress up in traditional plantation outfits, and they would, go back and have an 1800s like ball with traditional food, and that's when, and it was sort of, and everybody would pay a bunch of money to do it, so it was one of their big fundraisers, and everybody had a grand old time. Except when they had a few people of color, and particularly African Americans in their congregation, who said, exactly what do we wear to an 1800s ball? Which created really a huge crisis. Now, this is maybe even 30 years ago, because I was new in my ministry then. And people refused to go, but other people felt embarrassed and ashamed because they had been just playing, a very small piece of history. But now they felt badly, and they felt sort of stupid, and they were, and they got defensive, and, and eventually the district changed its name. We don't have districts anymore, so it's not a big deal. And that process took 2 or 3 years. And it was one of the symptoms, or one of the opportunities we had as a congregation to begin to tell a larger story, to retool some of our myths, and to ask harder questions, not only about who have we been, but who do we want to be? One of the reasons that I enjoy interim ministry and consulting with churches in transition, because it creates an opportunity to do some of that history taking and some of that revisioning. Who have we been these last almost 100 years? Who are we now? And who do we want to be? What are the things and traditions and stories we tell about CUUC that lift us up and broaden us and make us feel good and grounded and affirmed? And what are the stories or situations or arguments that have happened in the past that have made us feel diminished, or helped us see that maybe the stories and myths that we're telling about ourselves are true only this much? And there's a lot more stories and many more voices who have been excluded from the story of who we are as Unitarian Universalists and who you've been as a congregation. Now, I just want you to know a personal thing, that I am a Yankee, and on my father's side, I'm half the granddaughter of immigrants and half the granddaughter of the Stoddards who came over in 1630. And the Puritan side often wins. I love tradition. You can tell from my stuffing story. I love that we light a chalice at every service. I love that we have free thinkers who go back in history to Francis David in Transylvania, who said, maybe everybody's a little right and no one is totally right. I love to be part of a welcoming and affirming faith community. But I don't want much to change. You know, like this stuff, the technology and stuff, I'm just not into it. You know what I mean? I want the hymnal, I want to sit there, I want to collect them. And so it's challenging as we change. But I really, really think it's a wonderful opportunity for us both as a denomination to learn to sit with discomfort, to learn to listen to people who think about things differently than we do, to say, okay, that's how you see America. How come? What experiences have you had that have led you to that place? Here is my experience. And then let it go. I've seen so many congregations get into arguments that end up creating schisms. I have not found that here, I'm glad to say at this moment. But sometimes we have to lean into our discomfort. We have to look at our stories through a different lens. And we need to listen to voices, not only of people who've been excluded, but people who we may believe are deeply wrong, in order to understand the way in which our stories and our myths shape us, and the way in which, at times, we have to say no. We need a new story. We need a new way of seeing the world. And I need to hear you, even if what I'm hearing is deeply distressing to me. There was a wonderful show on NPR 2 days ago about a women's group of Palestinian and Israeli Jewish citizens who have this small but growing group of women who are trying to say, we're all mothers, we're all daughters, why can't we find some way to go ahead? And the groups are now being torn apart because Gazans can't stay in Gaza and not worry, because everyone is so angry that they can't even begin to wrestle that down enough that they can say, what is this like for you? I had a beautiful interview with two of these women who are in deep despair because they want a new story. And we are back telling the old one over and over again. As you move through this time of transition and share your stories about your faith journeys and about CUUC, I encourage you to keep listening, particularly when the conversations may be difficult. Since I have found that, as Tracy shared with us, not only do two people rarely experience one event the same way, even one person can experience an event in several ways. As Sana Sneed reminds us, we are all called to challenge ourselves, our comfort zones, our biases, to sit in discomfort as we go about this messy, difficult work of building a beloved community. To have patience when failure happens, to build a community that is working towards being free of systemic oppression. And this work always happens in connected community, in communities that hold space for imperfection and have faith in the mystery that moves us forward, sometimes even despite ourselves. And so I leave you also with that question. How can you best use this time to help you continue to build and strengthen and deepen your beloved community? And what stories do you need to tell or listen to make that even more real? Thank you. Let's join in singing hymn number 318, We Would Be One.
To pledge ourselves anew to the high cause of greater understanding of who we are and what in us is true. We would be one in living for each other, to show to all a new community.
Our closing words. Our greatest truths are but half-truths. Think not to settle down in any truth, but use it as a tent to pass the summer's night, and build no house for it, or it could become your tomb. When you first descry some counter-truth looming up in the distance, then weep not, but rejoice. It is the voice of the holy saying, take up your bed and walk.
As we extinguish our chalices, let's say our chalice extinguishing words together. The flame is extinguished, but not our hope for the future, our courage in the face of crisis, or the love we share in all the world.